Hello, I'm Maria Hall Brown. Welcome to Protest and Promise. This is a wonderful opportunity for young people across Los Angeles to get a chance to speak to their civic leaders. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Raquel Beltrán. She is the director of the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, or Empower LA. Great to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And we've got some wonderful, wonderful panelists today. I want to say hi to Elena, Alea, Andrea, Oliver, Evan, Allison, Devin, Alex, Bailey, Jewel, and Richard. We've got a full house today, so let's get rocking. Before we begin, let's sort of get an overview about what Empower LA is and what DONE is.
We are the grassroots arm of city government. We were formed by way of a charter amendment in 1999, and we provide direct neighborhood council support to 99 locally elected individuals representing 99 neighborhood councils. There are about 1,800 people in the neighborhood council system elected to these various boards, all of whom are elected to try to provide local service, local support, and to uplift the neighborhood and communities that they represent.
Since you all participate very strongly in issues that matter to you, what do you think a neighborhood council should provide to the city and vice versa? I mean, what are the things that are pertinent in your world that you think the council should know about and vice versa? Can you think about, what about you? What do you think, Evan? What do you think?
The census and gentrification, when I'm thinking about the neighborhoods in LA and neighborhood empowerment, and the upcoming election and how the action that's happening locally in our neighborhoods can affect that on a grander scale.
How do those things tie in? How does, a department such as yourself, help with, issues like the census, or help with issues like gentrification, or, upcoming election problems?
So in terms of the census, those are three very, very separate but can be integrated questions depending on how a person wants to approach community service and making change in their communities. I worked for the U.S. Census in 1980. It was not an internet census at that time. This is the first year that we're using the internet for the census. It was clumsy. It was big books that we had to carry around in order to be able to go door to door and collect questionnaires from people who had not mailed them in. The kinds of concerns that we see about the census now are not new. The census has always been a point of concern for underserved communities, low economic communities. There's always been a concern about underrepresentation and under-participation in the census from those communities. So this, what I'm impressed with in this particular census, which has had some complications that were compounded on top of what already happens with communities that tend to not participate in the census, is that there was early organizing, early coordination, and early, I mean 2 years ago, statewide, from nonprofit leaders and leaders in the philanthropic community, such as the California Community Foundation, who really came together and worked strategically to come up with a strategy that could be effective in these communities on a very targeted level to increase the response rates from communities that are considered in census, to live in census tracts that are hard to count and hard to reach. So it was really because of the foresight of people who have community interests at heart. A lot of them have a lot of organizing background that could really put together strategies based on data. They did studies. They figured out in what ways, what were the things that most resonated with people in the last census that increased the probability that they were going to respond and to the questionnaire. And the main thing two things I would share amongst the many things that surfaced in that data, statewide and local, was peer-to-peer communication and trusted messengers were two very, very strong indicators of what would increase the probability that a person would respond to the questionnaire. So the infrastructure has been set. now in 2020 to try to make that happen. I know there's been some setbacks in the most recent months in terms of changing the dates, but the infrastructure to be able to have community-based organizations with local leaders in local communities going out in the community to increase the probability that people will respond to the census has been in place, and that's what's going to continue to make the difference. And we're already seeing that in Los Angeles, where in Southeast Los Angeles, there's a collaborative of Sella Collaborative that has been, for example, having caravans that go through the community, through the different cities, the multiple cities in that area. The response rate in those communities, because there's that kind of activity, is already higher than it is in other areas, so it works.
Andrea, I know this is kind of to what you wanted to ask, because talking about advocacy and talking about what is legitimately possible, I know that you wanted to address, what your role as young Angelinos could be.
Yes, because I feel it's very important for a lot of the communities to involve the younger generations, especially since it has been a generational thing where we're not really heard. And even when we do talk, it's kind of pushed off as that we don't know what we're talking about a lot of the time. So to me, it's very important for especially city councils, because we as younger generations are there. We're out on the streets all the time. We're in schools. We see a lot of what's going on. And I feel like it's very important for us to be included in the talks and being able to advocate, especially during a time like what's going on.
What I can like to share is a couple of things that we do in our department to include the voices of young people in the work that we do, one of which was just finished last Monday, which is our Civic Youth LA program. We have high school students and young adults participating in that program. It's basically 4 Mondays through a period of structured workshops that cover a variety of topics, some of which are designed to help people understand how city government works, how to be able to get engaged, how to lift your voice. And we ended with a very, very intense discussion on what currently is happening across the world, really, and speaking to the issues of the protests for racial justice, implicit bias, discrimination, and how we connect to all of that and how we can address those issues as individuals, in our families, and in our communities. We also, in the neighborhood council system, are soon expecting to see the city council amend some of what is in the structure of the neighborhood councils. Each one has independence over their bylaws, but city council is going to be taking up the possibility of adopting an ordinance that will enable neighborhood councils to have at least a minimum of 1 dedicated youth seat on all of the neighborhood council boards, with a defined age of 14 to basically 16 to 17. And that will create some framework for young people to actually structurally be involved in neighborhood councils. So there are opportunities for you to do that. But in general, neighborhood councils, a lot of them have different kinds of workshops and advisory groups. Some of them have been engaging young people in the fabric of what they do on a day-to-day basis for quite a few years. So look to your neighborhood council, find out what kinds of committees they have, and get engaged. You don't have to be on the board to be engaged in your neighborhood council. You could just be a part of the community, and that's a wonderful place to be.
And there's obviously a website where people can get information for that.
Yes. The department's website has a list of all the neighborhood councils. It has the schedule of all of their meetings. You can go then to those, click on that, go to the neighborhood council's website itself, and even their subcommittee meetings you'll see on their website so that you can connect to them.
I know Allison was concerned about accessibility and availability of different resources within communities. Allison?
Basically, in the midst of the pandemic and with the closure of many public libraries, do neighborhood councils have the ability to assist individuals in the community who don't have access to laptops or the internet?
Yes, thank you for asking that question, and I will say yes. The leadership, in partnership with the department, launched what we call empowered virtual governance in the neighborhood council system. And what we did was, in less than 30 days, we created a virtual governance environment for neighborhood councils that transitioned them from in-person meetings to online meetings. and we launched that in May. As part of that process, we recognize that there's a digital divide that is real, that not only for some of the board members, but the stakeholders and the communities that they serve, that technology was not going to be an easy way to embrace having meetings and lifting your voice to City Hall. So we included a string of trainings to assist them in their transition as leaders over to a virtual governance system. And as part of that process, they are now empowered to do the same for their communities. We purchased a Zoom license for every single neighborhood council board in order to make that transition easier. There are aspects of Zoom that work for these kinds of meetings and aspects that don't work. And so we're all experiencing, what we're experiencing is that technology was not designed for the kind of governments that we do at a local level in a grassroots environment. So the beauty of all of this is that we worked in partnership with these locally elected leaders, and we're going to be constantly making changes in the future. And one of the reasons why Zoom was selected as the application and the platform to use for our virtual governance system is because you can participate by phone. So for those individuals that don't have laptops, they don't have access to the internet, but they still want to be engaged with their local community through the neighborhood council system, they can participate by phone, which is what the city council does as well as the boards and commissions that serve the city. It's in my view not enough, and we're going to be looking forward to creating opportunities to find new ways to constantly work with the technologies and the applications that are available to make this better. But it's what we have available. We're adapting it to the system, and we look forward to being trailblazers in the future to suggesting ways in which it could be improved. And I hope you're part of that.
Bailey, I know that you have concerns about youth in neighborhoods.
Yes, usually the community doesn't really listen to youth and what we have to say and what we have to give. So what other ways could we as teenagers help at this certain time?
One role that you can play on a neighborhood council is to provide, we're recruiting data liaisons. There's a liaison process in the neighborhood council system. You can be a homelessness liaison, you can be a liaison that's involved in emergency preparedness and sustainability, and we're recruiting data liaisons in the neighborhood council system where you can, if you can work with your neighborhood council to be their liaison on behalf of the neighborhood council to an infrastructure that we're creating in the system. It's completely new, where we want to build the technology capacity of the neighborhood councils to serve their communities and to manage their own affairs. So there are opportunities for you to get engaged with neighborhood councils at that level and many other levels. Every neighborhood council is structured differently. In the sense that they identify different priorities based on what they think the needs of the communities are. So their committee structures will be dedicated to those kinds of things. As an example, there are some neighborhood councils that have a very large equestrian community. They have equestrian committee. So if that's of interest to you in that neighborhood, you can get involved in some of those committee structures. But to the broader point of not being listened to, not being accounted for, or for having your thoughts and your perspective not valued, that's pretty. I would have to say it's common through the generations. It's not something that is. I have to say for me, it's not unique to this generation. I remember experiencing and feeling the same. When I began my journey into community organizing, I was I think 17 or 18 when I joined an organization to begin building a labor union for domestic workers in this country. It's the third labor union to be built and created by people of color. The first was the Pullman Workers Union, second was United Farm Workers, and then there was the United Domestic Workers Union. But I was really young. I didn't know anything about labor movements. I didn't know anything about labor organizing. But like you, I knew I cared about the community and I wanted to get involved to make change. And that evolved into what ended up being a career in public administration. So it's one piece that you get involved in that opens opportunities and connections to other pieces, but getting started is the way to get started.
I'm going to assume that all of you are interested in change to a certain degree. With government, with how things are run. So who wants to share where they think change needs to happen?
I know that recently we've been seeing an increase in terms of participation from just ordinary individuals and just civic groups that have been sprouting out, ever since, it's been a turbulent political year, but also these past 5 years. My question would be, how does the city council aid in terms of like providing more participation? Because from what I see is that it streamlines the process of addressing local issues. Like they're more receptive in the way that we kind of imagine our House representatives and senators, because they're elected every 2 years, they would be more responsive, which is how I'm looking at the city council and all these neighborhood councils as well. They kind of just streamline that participation.
So Alex, is your question, how does city government engage people in their process?
With particular, like specifically to the neighborhood councils.
To the neighborhood councils. It's a very structured system for the neighborhood councils. It's part of the beauty of the neighborhood council system. Anybody can attend any public meeting and participate. You don't have to be a part of anything. You can speak for yourself as an individual. And I always encourage people to do that. You don't have to be part of another network. You can just have an opinion that you think is worth sharing. And sometimes there's tremendous, tremendous power in that. Their neighborhood councils themselves have a process that's structured called community impact statements. It's a portal that they use to actually go on record with the city council and file an opinion or a position about the item before city council. Let's say it's street sweeping. Before they do that, the neighborhood council has to have had a discussion on their board about that issue. And so they govern and manage a conversation so that whatever they put and decide to submit in their community impact statement is reflective of what the total board has agreed on. So that's a process of negotiation and compromise, hearing different opinions about the subject, getting testimony from stakeholders and communities like people like you who will come to their neighborhood council and say, I don't think you should take that position with city council. Or they'll say, I do think you should take that position with city council. Or here's what we think you should ask the city to do differently on that issue than what's actually looks like they're going to be doing.
I know, Oliver, you have some concerns about how the city handles some of our biggest issues, such as homelessness.
Yeah, hello. So I was wondering how LA is dealing with homelessness, especially in times of COVID, because I know from 2019 to now, it's gone up 12.7%, and there's 66,433 people that now live on the streets or within shelters. And I just wanted to know how LA prioritizes who gets what type of aid and what that aid is.
Mm-hmm. So I can share a couple things. One is that I've been working and exposed in public policy, public administration to the issues of homelessness for about 30 years in different parts of the state. It's a very complicated issue and has evolved and presented itself to us in different ways over that period of time. There are, what I like about what Los Angeles is doing is that it is really at the forefront of really forcing itself along with its partner government agencies to buckle down and to coordinate the way in which they respond and meet the needs of the homeless population. Mayor Garcetti has a saying that I think is important to remember, that and I really like the leadership role that he has shown us in this issue. Homelessness is less about getting people off the street, it's about poverty. And I have had the opportunity to volunteer in the disaster worker program that the current city currently has during the pandemic in Project Room Key, where under the mayor's leadership and the city council's leadership, they've now identified partners in hotels that are housing and people that are asymptomatic of COVID in hotels that were closed because of the pandemic, helping them to get off the street and be in these hotels, managed by nonprofit organizations that specialize in services for the homeless for homeless populations in order to ensure that at that hotel they have some basic services that are available that are really, in some cases, community-based services or county services. They're not city services that are designed to meet the needs, some of the needs of homeless populations. So when you volunteer at a place like that, you see people of different ages, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, different reasons for being homeless. And it really reminds you that you cannot say it's one reason. You cannot say that. And because you cannot say it's just for one reason, that means the solution isn't one item. It's a complexity of things, and in order to be able to address the issue, you've got to have an infrastructure that's coordinated amongst all the agencies of government that have touch points in order to be able to, on a one-on-one basis, talk to the individuals, find out what their needs are, and how we can best give them the kind of support that they need to move them out of homelessness into a stable home environment and all else that will have to come with that. So these efforts are very complicated. They've had some rough starts because this is massive. LA is massive. Making these agencies or having these agencies coordinate is very, very hard work. And they don't always talk the right way to one another, but these people are making an effort. The nonprofit community has had a major role in trying to coordinate some aspects of these services, and philanthropy has also really come forward to really support the entire infrastructure. More needs to be done, but we'll see a lot of that coming on the horizon. Many more homes are going to be built just between now and December. Housing is going to be available between now and December. And the mayor is in partnership with the city council offices where some of these projects are being built are really on a fast track to create those opportunities so that those facilities exist in order to be able to move people into those environments.
I know, Devin, you had actually had a question about just housing in LA at large, which is one of the components that leads to homelessness.
LA is kind of notorious for being very expensive to live in.
Yes.
So what would you say is the main reason for this rise in the cost of living and housing in Los Angeles? And what are some of your plans, if any, that you have to get that cost down so more people can afford housing?
So I'd have to answer that question by saying I don't really have an answer for the question that can be as straight lined as you're hoping. I think there are organizations that dedicate themselves to looking at the economy, looking at the cause of poverty, and looking at root causes and long-term strategies that are necessary in order to be able to change the way the economy functions, in order to be able to help people with the cost of living. There are different, factors that feed into cost of living and also to the economic conditions of a city, in this case of a city, and that are multifaceted. So that isn't just kind of one thing. And so studying that can be a project in and of itself. I know that the leadership at the city has really taken a more comprehensive approach to the way in which it addresses some of these issues. And they look at things like raising the minimum wage so that there's more money into the economy. That means that it's more available to people so that they can pay their rent, minimize the probability of homelessness. When people are really living paycheck to paycheck, homelessness becomes real to all of us when we're in that kind of situation. Looking at the way in which job opportunities and kind of the infrastructure for the economy is structured so that you have different ways to build your capacity to be engaged in the economy in a way that doesn't keep you without a job, unemployed, and then perpetuate the kind of poverty conditions that we have. And that affects education, that affects technology. So speaking to all of those touch points to not just so the cost of living isn't just about one piece of it, but it's about how all of those pieces combine, work together in order to create a stable environment for people in Los Angeles.
And I know that, actually, Elena had a practical question about how things play out in this regard with poverty and homelessness in Los Angeles?
Oh, yeah. My question was that, well, considering that with different geographical regions, these different regions have different infrastructure, education, and economy, and different kinds of people in different racial groups living there. And I was wondering, what's the correlation between structural issues like poverty and homelessness with other intrinsic features of an area, and what can you do to actually address these inherent inequities in an area?
Mm-hmm. So in a city like Los Angeles, in the county Los Angeles, it's important to be able to really pay attention to the local voices and to really look at the situation in that particular local community. That's the beauty of the neighborhood council system, is it really allows for local leaders to be able to bring in that voice and that perspective into City Hall. We just finished a survey of social, economic, and inclusiveness and equity survey, and we surveyed the leadership on the neighborhood councils. And what they told us system-wide was, we asked them to identify 3 priorities, issues related to social and economic conditions in their communities. You can go to our website, and on our website you can actually see on a region-to-region basis what neighborhood council leaders told us were the priorities for them in terms of social economic disparities. So that's one piece one item that's available to you in order to be able to see exactly what they thought those issues were. And what you will see is where the differences are. You'll be able to see how differently or the same Encino may have viewed the issue versus Harbor City as an example. So it really emphasized that in these different parts of Los Angeles, people live in different universes. Their experience to LA, they experience Los Angeles differently, and we really have to address issues at a micro local level in order to be able to be responsive to what those communities needs. And I can just share that system-wide, the top priority that neighborhood council leaders identified, 63% selected housing as being an important initiative. 50% said schools, education, and the third, 46% said supportive mental health services. So it varies, and when you look at that data dashboard that we have, you can actually zoom in and see more specifically what a local community may have thought. Some of that may have been the same, some of it may have been different, but it's available as a resource.
From a governmental standpoint, you mentioned a change in minimum wage, et cetera, but there are some other more innovative things that people are trying to do. And I know that Richard had a question about how city government responds to people being entrepreneurial in their own economic stability.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been thinking about, and my girlfriend is from Los Angeles as well, and she was asking, a lot of these people are trying to start their own businesses, and she's one of them. And she's saying it's so difficult just to get all the permits, and there's all these, hidden costs, and they try and, she said it's like it's a crime to try and make money for yourself in the city of Los Angeles and the state of California. And so, is there any discussion about anything that's being done? It seems like everything is geared more towards creating new rules rather than getting rid of some of the ones that are outdated or unnecessary.
No, I think there's a lot of discussion about that, and more so in the era of the pandemic. And some of that is, and we're going to see a lot more of government being forced to kind of reevaluate the way in which it processes things and thinks about things. And the way in which independent contractors, which is what I suspect your girlfriend is the nature of their business, the mayor talks a lot about the significant number of people who are independent contractors, conducting business as individuals from their homes, trying to make a living, in some cases very successfully. There are more and more stories of positive experiences where people are being very creative during this pandemic period, with the way in which they're trying to kind of reinvent the way in which they provide for themselves economically. And so I think that's going to force government to look at those kinds of questions, the ones that you're asking, in order to be able to support that work. because that's where I think some of the future is going to be, because it is possible in that environment to employ more people if the resources are there and the infrastructure is there to support expansion of those kinds of business resources. Some of them, the government always has to be thinking about regulation. That just comes with the territory. We have to think about consistency and fairness, and how to make it possible for systems to exist, within the rules that have to be followed. That's part of what government's job is. But I think government does want to kind of open it up so that there'll be greater opportunities in the future.
I know Aaliyah had a question about just basic government and how things are managed from a budgetary standpoint.
Yeah, I had a question about how does LA create their city budget, and what role does the neighborhood city council play in it?
Mm-hmm. So all levels of government have a fiscal year. In the case of the city of Los Angeles, it starts July 1st and it ends June 30th. The federal government has like a September-October cycle, just to use as an example. But in LA, we have a July 1st to June 30th cycle. The budget development process occurs basically in the summer and in the fall. And the mayor releases a budget in this particular city because we have a mayor council, strong mayor form of government in Los Angeles. And so the mayor really takes the leadership role in coordinating the receipt of proposed budgets from all of the departments. Like I have to submit mine, usually it'll be around September or so as a department. And this is where we tell the mayor what our asks are and what we would like to do in the next fiscal year. And the metrics that, this is a very metrics-driven mayor. He wants to know what our metrics are for all the things that we want to accomplish in the fiscal year. The mayor's office reviews that basically through February. The neighborhood council has a budget advocates system where budget advocates from neighborhood councils review some of those documents in order to be able to prepare for the mayor the perspective that neighborhood councils have on the proposed budget, which kind of goes into the May and June period. The mayor's budget is presented to the city council. The city council then reviews the mayor's proposed budget. They make changes to it, and ultimately the budget is adopted in June. So those 311 calls, those community impact statements from neighborhood councils on the budget, all of those are just a couple of examples of how the city government will make decisions about how it's going to best meet the needs of its residents. The first thing that the city will always do is try to figure out how much revenue it's going to have. Cities always are trying to create ways to generate revenue in their cities as a way to use those revenues in order to fund the services that the people want. So it's a balancing act, just like all of us in our personal finances. How much you got? How much do you have to spend? And then where do you have flexibility around that? And how do I decide what the priorities are? Health and safety will always be first for government. It kind of always takes precedent. But the way in which we define health and safety can be broad. There are traditional ways in which health and safety is defined, but we're now in an era where we're finding new ways of defining what health and safety is, and what health means, and what that means to communities can be different and can vary in communities. So there are opportunities now to kind of redefine the way in which government is looking at some of those issues, and I think it's exciting, and I hope you're a part of that.
Allison, what do you want Raquel to walk out of here thinking about?
To remember that the young people are always watching their politicians, even when they don't think they are.
Awesome. Jewel, what do you hope Raquel wants?
So piggybacking off the youth, I would like her to recognize that there's at-risk youth in a lot of these communities.
Oliver, what are your thoughts?
I'd like her to walk away knowing that the youth shouldn't be underestimated, and that if at any point in a meeting she's in, somebody undermines our intelligence or our abilities, that she calls them out on it and tells us that we can make change.
You got it.
Richard?
We are probably the most entrepreneurial generation ever, and so we're trying. So stop making it more difficult for us.
Andrea.
Just basically to hear our voices and know that we do have a lot of ideas and things that we want to be done for our government and for our younger generations, especially younger than us, because we are the younger generation right now and we realize that there are younger generations than we are. So we just want to make it better instead of worse.
Alea.
I think piggybacking off of what everyone said, that like don't underestimate our power and our ability to want and try to make change.
Devin.
To remember to keep laying the groundwork for positive change in the future.
And Bailey.
Like everyone said, we are paying attention and that we are the next people to help this community.
And what do you hope that our wonderful young panelists will walk away from today with?
Being involved in their neighborhood council. It would be great to have all of you there. I'd like to be able to invite you to participate in the civic youth programming that we have in the future. And I just want to make sure that we stay connected as time goes on. There's going to be a lot for us to do, And I really hope to be able to work with you to make the changes and to make LA what we all would like for it to be. Thank you very much for allowing me to be with you today. I really greatly appreciate it.
All right, and thank you so much for all of your wonderful,
It's my pleasure.
Open, listening and sharing. And thank you all. You're all brilliant. I can't wait to talk to you again. Be safe, be well, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap on this edition of Protest and Promise.